Welcome to Legacy Builders, strategies for building successful family enterprises. Brought to you by Beacon Family Office and Asante Financial Management Limited. I'm your host, Corey Gagnon, Senior Wealth Advisor. And on this show, we explore global ideas, concepts, and models that help family enterprises better navigate the complexities of family wealth. Today, we welcome Tim Yeung, advisor at Landsberg Gersik Advisors. From his 10 years of experience working in his family's successful multi-generational commercial real estate business, his transition to the role of family enterprise advisor reflects his strong background in business and a deep understanding of family enterprise dynamics and governance structures. As a certified family enterprise advisor and trained certified professional coactive coach, my goal is to be the most curious person in today's conversation with Tim Yeung, where we explore the journey of an engineer developing into a skilled advisor, guiding families towards alignment and prosperity. Tim will share insights on supporting next generations as they shape their own identities and differentiate amidst internal pressures to conform in the family enterprise. We'll explore how working with advisors can set the enterprise up for tomorrow by gently encouraging the quiet voices while calming those eroding unity to help families commit to difficult conversations today. Now, let's dive in. Well, welcome, Tim. We're excited to have you here today to share your wealth of knowledge and experiences. Let's dive in, shall we?
Sounds good.
Tim, imagine you're delivering a commencement speech to the graduating class of 2024, and you have the chance to inspire them with your story. How would you begin your speech to convey the incredible lessons and expertise that you've gained along your career?
You know, it is a great question. And as I was putting my thought to this, it's really struck me that a book I've been reading called Designing Your Life is really aligned with a lot of my life experience, and unsurprisingly puts it more succinctly and more eloquently than I did for myself, which is that there's this feeling, and maybe it's because I come from an engineering background, of like wanting to do the optimal thing, like wanting to get it right. And I think there's really no wire cutter article for how to live your best life. We want a GPS, like I want a GPS for what it looks like to live my best and most fulfilled life. But you can't have a GPS when nobody's lived your life before. And so I think the way they put it, and the way I've really enjoyed reading about it, is that we don't need GPS. We just need a direction and a compass. And then from there, we can choose our own adventure. You know, kind of like those old choose your own adventure books where you flip to this page and then you follow the thread where it goes. And I think in our lives, it behooves us to think about our lives that way too. The problem with being obsessed with optimal is we spend more time analyzing than actually living. And I'm guilty of this, of that. You want to get the perfect system. You want to get the perfect schedule. You want to get the perfect framework for things. And then you spend more time doing that than actually doing the thing. And I think we do that with our lives as well. And so that's what I would tell people, which is have a place where you want to go and start to figure out how you want to get there, and be okay knowing that there are going to be multiple ways of getting there, and that it's okay to figure that out on your own.
I love that. And Tim, tell me a little bit, the engineer, that mindset of analyzing, how have you kind of navigated that within your life? Because I'm sure there's been challenges as you've found yourself looking for that GPS.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a feeling of wanting to get it right. And I think it's because you want, like, at least for me, it's like I want to get as good as possible, as quickly as possible. And that's where, on the one hand, you know, there's a humility in that, and just admitting like, I don't know best. So I just want to figure out, someone else needs to tell me how to do this the best way. But I also think part of it is realizing that there not necessarily is, and no one will know it better than I do for myself. Um, I think where the engineering, I want to say it's been helpful, is the way of, and maybe this is my engineering background. I don't know. Actually, it's hard to separate. I haven't lived a separate life where I didn't go to engineering to see what it was like, but I think the engineering has given me a desire to understand everything I learn, to anything I'm interested in, really, to like first principles, like at a base level. How does this all work? Do I understand it? And then from there, all the tactics and things like that, those are just applications of those principles. And so I think that's where the engineering has helped me. I want to think of a place where it hasn't helped me. I think it hasn't helped me where sometimes you can be stubborn around data. You know, I'm sure you've all experienced in your practice where, you know, there are lawyers who are good at talking to other lawyers. There are engineers that are good at talking to other engineers, accountants, the same thing. It's the engineers and the lawyers and the accountants that are good at talking to lay people that are the best at what they do.
Yeah.
And I think similarly, sometimes I can get too caught up on what the data says, thinking I'm talking to other engineers, thinking I'm talking to people with the exact same kind of mindset, values, or ways of thinking that I do. And it isn't very helpful because you kind of have to be able to meet people where they are. And I think especially that in my work now, working with families, you can't expect them to meet you where you are.
And I appreciate that so much, Tim, in that there are these experts in their field that work with, as you say, lay people, and the work that they do can be tremendous, but without the ability to communicate that with the people and have them buy in, the plan, the design, the whatever it might be that they're delivering can be sabotaged so easily. And
sure.
So in your experience as an advisor and as you've formed how you approach things, how have you found that holds true in your practice?
I think I love geeking out on things. And I have to realize for myself that just because I like geeking out on things doesn't mean other people do. And I think I'm guilty of this where I want to bring everyone along on my geeky ride of the things I've been learning. And I think really where it comes down to is instead of, I've actually been going through like a YouTube course recently. And one of the things they talk about in this YouTube course is that the viewer doesn't want you to show them how smart you are. They want to feel smart.
Right.
And so I think similarly in conversations with people, like it's not about making this people feel smart necessarily, but it's really about, instead of impressing people with knowledge, it's really actually about being curious and being able to help them actually articulate where they want to go. Whether I'm already working with them or not, you know, I actually, there's a guy named Chris Do. He runs the Future, a creative company, and he talks about how like when you're working with a potential client, it's really just about helping them articulate where they want to go, because we assume people already understand where they want to go, but most people don't, and that's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people are stuck, or sometimes people don't yet have the courage to even put into words where their dreams are and where they want to go. And that's whereas like when you work with people, like that's actually the gift that we have to give, which is we get to help them articulate that and get them excited about that future and where they want to go. And then if it aligns with your expertise, then you can support them. And if it doesn't align with your expertise, then you can direct them to people from whom they can receive that support. And in so doing, you've done a gift, you've given them a service either way. And right. I think that for me has been really helpful of like trying to just meet people where they are, not assuming that they know as much as I do, because they probably don't spend their time like I do, their free time reading about family enterprise advising books, right? And that's totally good and fine. I need to meet them where they are, understand where their problems are, and try to help them articulate where they want to go.
Right. And Tim, going back to the fact that you're trained as an engineer and now
Mhm.
doing this work, I feel as though there's somebody in your past who's helped you articulate where you are going, maybe help with the map and the compass as you talked about. How did you make that change and be on the path that you're on today?
I think for me personally, I've had, and I think we all need these people in our lives that have dropped in at different points and sometimes directly, sometimes very indirectly have really pointed me to, this is what you're good at. This is who you can become. For me personally, I worked in my family business in real estate development for 10 years. I like to think I was good at my job. I think I had a fairly good understanding of the industry. Um, but actually it was the gift of working with one of my employees, and I had a super difficult conversation. And it was that conversation where I saw that employee's career just completely turn around. And it was in that moment I reflected on this like years later. I realized, hey, of all the things I've done in this real estate career of mine, that was by far the most satisfying. You know, I got the most excited about seeing that person realize all of their potential. And I think it was that realization that was that compass. So I think there's a lot of different vocations and jobs I could have done that would lean into this people development compass, this clue that I was given. And I decided to try out this family advising. And I didn't know if I would be any good at it. I didn't know if it was going to be a viable career. I'm happy to say that I think I'm okay at it. And it is a viable career. And the result has been good, but it was really that clue of exploring and trying and testing this out. And it was because of my reflection on what I really enjoyed, what I really found satisfying, what gave me a ton of energy in my work that directed me in this way.
That's going back to your comment about people spending more time analyzing than living. It sounds like that was that turning point of living at that discovery point.
For sure. And I think there was the additional kind of speed bump of I really, really care about my family business. I worked a year in my family business in Hong Kong. I grew up in Canada, and so I couldn't speak Cantonese by the time I was in my teens. And so part of me going back and living in Hong Kong was I really wanted to learn the language. What I didn't realize was in learning a second language in my 20s was that I finally kind of experienced firsthand the plight of not knowing how to speak the native language. People thinking you're stupid because you can't communicate, realizing that you can't be funny if you don't have the vocabulary or the timing to nail your jokes. You're certainly not smart if you can't even ask for water properly, right? So I realized in that how much was given up for me to come to Canada. And because of that, I had this deep affection, a deep abiding affection in my family business and what it meant and what it gave to me. And so for a long time, it was kind of my dream to be able to support and lead the family business. And it took me a long time, I think, to realize that my affection for the business actually didn't mean I had to lead it, especially if that wasn't really where my skill set lay. And that was
Right.
the other kind of hurdle that I needed to kind of understand for myself and decide for myself, choose for myself before I moved on to this new vocation.
And that realization, Tim, where you were on your journey within that family business, where the aspirations of leadership were there, to the realization that maybe you didn't need to do that. Uh, you know, how did the pressure from within or external pressures play into some of your decisions?
Fortunately, I'm fortunate in the sense that in my family there were no external pressures. My family was really supportive of me entering the business, and they were really supportive of me pursuing this new job as well, or this new vocation as well. The pressure really resided with me. I think it resided with me and being a little too caught up in what I thought other people were thinking. Um, there's a fantastic book. It's called The Courage to Be Disliked. And it talks about how it kind of walks you through this thought experiment of you can't please everyone. And if you actually do try to please everyone, you will become kind of nothing in that process. That's the short version of it. And a part of actually living a good life is the courage to be disliked, the courage to just do things and not be beholden to what you think other people think. And I think that was a big turning point for me is if people are going to think whatever they think about my decision, I need to be okay with that. Like I need to be able to respect myself for the decision I made. And I need to be not beholden to what I think other people think.
Right. Now, as you mentioned, Tim, the external pressures weren't felt in your work with family enterprises and the families that you've met either as an advisor or within your community. Is that common?
I would say in most families I work with, the internal pressures are quite strong. You know, there is an expectation around being in the business or being a certain way, acting the way we did. And I think that there's positives in terms of the transmission of tradition and legacy, but there's also negatives in terms of a stifling environment.
Right.
A recipe for a very unfulfilled life is a life where you feel like you have made none of your own decisions and that someone else has made all of them for you. And while that may feel very dutiful and obedient, it's a matter of time before that feels like a straitjacket, right? And so there's a model of um, couples, and it helps people understand whether you're in the healthy spectrum or unhealthy spectrum. And it doesn't matter. There's two axes. One axis is cohesion, like how close you are, and the other axis is flexibility. And it's just you can't have a family that is so flexible that it's chaos, and you can't have a family that's so inflexible that it can't move. And you don't want a family that's so fully fused that it has no identity whatsoever outside of one another. And you also don't want a family that's so alienated or distant from one another, you're basically not family. You just don't want to be on those extremes. Right. And so in families where the internal pressures are too strong, you tend to land on that inflexibility spectrum. And that is a very unhealthy place for families to be because almost by definition, families, businesses, lives change. And if we operate within a super inflexible system, it will be incapable of managing those changes in the future. It would be imagine driving a car. I'm not sure how bad Calgary's roads are with potholes and stuff, but imagine driving a car with zero suspension. That would be terribly uncomfortable. In fact, the car would probably break at some point, right?
Yes.
And that's what families do. When families are so inflexible, they don't build the resilience, the capacity to change. They're basically betting on glass roads. Like they need a glass road or else their car will break. And that's not a good bet.
Tim, let's go back to the word identity. And being in that position of next gen, identity can be difficult to shape. There's oftentimes a large shadow cast by the generation, either the founding generation or the generations before. How do you find that shaping identity has its challenges, being that next gen?
I think you've hit it on the head, Corey. Identity, I think it's Peter Leach that talks about this. Peter Leach or the conflict equation, I forget which one. The chief psychological barrier for family businesses is differentiation. For each new generation to actually create their own identity and believe in their own capability and self-worth. That's a process that happens fairly naturally outside of family businesses. You grow up, you go away for university, you get a job, you're gainfully employed, and therefore you've set up a household, a life outside of your parents. In family businesses, that doesn't often doesn't occur. You come home for internships, you come home right after you finish university, you've got your first job. And so you've never created an identity outside of the family. And so when you don't overcome that, it's something that kind of weighs on you. When someone asks you, are you just here because your last name? Well, you may kind of feel like that's kind of a jerk question to ask, but you may also not have the confidence to rebut or to feel okay about yourself after. So I think it is like a tremendous issue. And I think some people don't have that issue, but for a lot of people, they do. And I think that's the chief psychological issue for family members entering business. And how do you get around that? I would say that's where generally a lot of advisors would work with their clients and say it's probably a good idea for any family member before they join the business to work somewhere else, not
Right.
just for their credibility within the business, for their credibility in how they view themselves.
Right.
When you've worked 3 to 5 years at an external company where they didn't have to employ you because your last name didn't mean anything there, that goes a long way in terms of you feeling confident in who you are, what your capabilities are, what your skills are. When you've only done that in your own family business, that tends to be a question mark that hangs around.
Right. Now, going back to the advisor family and how they're developing that as they're developing this human capital, this next generation, what sort of considerations do you suggest as you're working with families on that?
I think a big part of it, so Jay Hughes talks about this idea that the founder has been usually wildly successful, has a dream for what the business will be, what the family's legacy will be. And we often get caught up in that gravity. And so in some ways, differentiation, creating your own identity, is being able to not run away from that gravity, to not go to another solar system and pretend your family doesn't exist, but it's also not to get sucked in and be completely captured by it. It's to create a boundary around that gravity and decide what it means to you. I think developing your human capital at some level means you have to support the next generation in finding their own identity, giving them the space to reconcile who they are, who they want to choose to be, with what the family legacy is, and coming to a healthy balance of what that means. So does that mean you have to work in the family business? That's a very hard imposition to make. I think the healthy one would be, we would always welcome you into family governance, but you don't have to work here, that kind of stuff. Jay Hughes also talks about this idea that families are fundamentally in the business of having every member thrive. So that's could land in a variety of applications, but it's really like a heart stance. Does the family really believe they want every member to thrive, and therefore they can create their own identity in who they are, and the family's going to support that? Or does the family at some level believe unless you work in the business, you're kind of nothing? Or unless you kind of surpass dad, you're not measuring up? That would be a really unhealthy way to pursue this, or to stand in relation to the rest of the family.
Right. And so that culture of thriving as individuals, to be able to have the family as a collective thrive, a lot of balance within that. How have you seen? Do you have any examples of families that have done that really well?
I think the families that have done that really well have, and it's scary, but have believed in their kids to make good choices. A lot of families that I've seen believe that the way to protect the future is by limiting the opportunities for the kids to screw it up. Whether it's through a trust structure or through various mechanisms to prevent share ownership. That is one way of going into the future. That's kind of like growing your bottom line by cutting expenses only. It'll work
Right.
until it doesn't, because at a certain point there will be no expenses left to cut. And for certain family members, if you only believe that they're going to screw it up, eventually at some point they will screw it up. I think the families that I've seen really be successful at this, the older generation really believes in the younger generation, right? I think if the older generation is just waiting for the shoe to drop, is just waiting for the younger generation to disappoint them, to show them that their true colors don't measure up, that's going to be really hard. And that's going to come through in everything that the family does. The one family I'm thinking of, the parents really believe in their kids, and it shows. And I think it's purely because of that the kids have succeeded.
Right. And as you mentioned, the idea of increasing that bottom line, and great metaphor, Tim, of cutting expenses, being equivalent to having very tight structures in place. From the revenue side of the P&L, what would you say would be some examples of behaviors and practices from that perspective?
I think it changes in every family. I think one really positive practice is the practice of a family bank. A part of the capital that's specifically allocated to support endeavors of the family. I think the beauty, in my opinion, of that structure is that a bank, if they lend you money, at best, they care about you as a customer, but really, in terms of business, what they care about is that you make your interest payments and then you pay back the loan. The bank didn't lose money. So if you do all that, they're happy. If a family bank makes a successful loan to an entrepreneur in the family and they pay back the interest and they pay back the principal, well, and then now that business is thriving. Well, actually, the family bank has won twice. The first win was the normal bank win, which is that they got their money back. The second win was they accomplished their purpose of supporting entrepreneurship. They accomplished their purpose of seeing that member thrive. So that's like one mechanism, and it doesn't have to be the only one, but I think it's a fairly elegant one for one, encouraging family members to start new businesses, and two, submitting to the rigor of some type of family process to show that they're actually going to put all of their heart and effort into it.
I love that. And talking about purpose, there's much purpose within in different families, and the way that they define that is different. So, family bank being a great tool, and I think there's some best practices there that we could dive further into. But within that purpose, a lot of families have constitutions and have things defined, and some are on that journey of defining them. What have you seen to help really get down to that core of what's the family's purpose, and how are they going to continue on that journey to accomplish that?
I would say, Corey, I think purpose is important, but I would put a shared vision above the purpose. Shared vision and shared core values, I think I would put above the purpose, because the shared vision is why you're staying together and excited about where you're going to go. I think you've decided to come together for to go on this journey, and the shared vision is that compelling picture of the future that the family wants to get to, is willing to even do the hard work to get to do those extra family meetings, to work on the constitution, to consider how to evolve policies as the family changes, that takes a lot of work. And a lot of it, it's not like you're getting paid for it. You're going to get some benefits from the family in the future, but you're not doing it purely on a time basis for money. You're doing it because it's important to you. So I think a shared vision is super important. And I think values are equally important, because you can't really get to a shared vision if you don't have shared core values to some level. You can get there if you have different values. It doesn't work if you have core values that are incompatible. You know, I could think of, if there's an oil and gas family and one family member is just staunchly against anything that creates greenhouse gases, I mean, that's going to be very hard for those siblings, let's say, to stay in business together. It would actually, in some ways, be a much healthier decision for those siblings to buy one out and for them to remain family that still talks to each other, but not in business together. Right. So I think in my mind, the core values are kind of your foundation, and you kind of need that to get to a shared vision. And the shared vision is the galvanizing cry or rallying cry for where the family wants to go, that will make all the family meetings and the extra work worth it.
Right. And going back to the cohesion and flexibility is, as you speak of those values, and how is that alignment able to work within the family, and knowing when it will work, and maybe when it won't, and definition of success. So, as you say, the vision, how vivid is that within families that you've seen be really successful at this?
I think it's pretty vivid. I think I've had a lot of people do this, where I try to have them think about where they want to see their family, the legacy of what they've built in 50 years. They've long gone, they're not around anymore, and their family is thriving and flourishing. And what do you see? And I would be very surprised to hear anyone say, I see a portfolio that has grown at 20% annualized. I doubt that that's the picture that they see. Yeah. I think what they see are grandchildren or great grandchildren that they don't know, that still know each other and care about each other because of what the family has done to get them there. And I think it's some variation on that picture. Maybe there's a business in there, maybe there isn't. Maybe there's a special family vacation house, maybe there isn't. But I think it's that realization that that picture of the future is in some shape or form thriving human capital.
Right.
I don't think you will find a family where that picture in the future is thriving financial capital.
Yes.
And so I think that's the common thread, is that it's really actually coming back. I know it sounds really pat, but it's coming back to the people, because all of this has meaning only because of the family to do with it. Otherwise, you're just an investment club with the same last name.
Right.
Right. We just happen to, or slightly familiar last names, because, maybe there's a few different last names in there. But that's the problem, is unless you actually really just focus on the human capital, that family capital, then you could just be a hedge fund, and I think that's where the smart families focus on the human capital, knowing that if you do that, the financial capital will take care of it itself, but if you don't focus on the human capital's decay will eventually decay the financial capital as well.
Yes. And let's go back to that vision and the family creating that, the legacy 50 years from now. And who in the family do you typically see initiating that?
Often that's a little bit of the trap, right? Is that, I think everyone will just invariably look to the matriarch or the patriarch. And while that's important, and every family is different, I don't think that's wrong. The stickiest, the reason I could get my work done with families like extremely quickly. We could do everything in a few hours because I could just give them the best practices. I could tell the patriarch, the matriarch, is this good? And they would say, yeah. And then we're done, right? But the problem with that approach is that when you just look to the matriarch, patriarch to sign off on everything and no one else is really involved, it's not that sticky.
Right.
People aren't really fully invested. They may actually even feel, even though it's status quo, they may not feel heard. And so that's really where ideally maybe the vision is seeded by the patriarch, matriarch, but the rest of the family needs to be able to engage and have a voice and some level of authorship of that vision or where the family wants to go for it to actually stick, for the family to actually coalesce around it. That's where people use the word like co-creation. It's created together in an organic process that's not predestined or preordained. And that's where, and I know this sounds a bit like a bit of a used car salesman selling myself thing, but it's not just me. I think people can work with anyone. But this is where it's really useful to work with external facilitators and advisors that aren't part of your system, that can see and bring in different voices, that can call out, or not call out, encourage the quiet ones to join in, to quiet the loud ones that talk too much, and to really try to bring the family to a collective understanding of where they want to go.
Right.
Instead of the loud majority, or let's say the loud minority, dictating the outcome.
And Tim, as you mentioned, the matriarch and patriarch could sign off and say, "Good, let's move on." But then there's who's carrying the baton to make that legacy actually come to fruition. And
100%.
and in that transition of, call it power or the dominance within that family system, how do you see the evolution of some of those visions? Because it could be 2 generations, 3 generations ago that had this vision, and now the world's a different place.
I 100%. I agree that the baton needs to be carried on. The torch needs to be not just passed on, it needs to be grabbed. That they want this. That's the ideal. There 100% needs to be latitude and some flexibility and understanding what these values mean to the next generation. There 100% needs to be latitude and understanding of what does this vision mean to us now.
Right.
You can imagine when, like, let's say when we were growing up, what was being super forward thinking around caring for the environment. We were just talking about recycling. And I think if you were just to talk to kids nowadays about recycling, they would kind of be like, are you a little behind? Like, that's kind of like that is the lowest common denominator in caring for the environment. It's a complete given that you would recycle. Not
Right.
a big deal.
Yes.
The big thing now is, electrification of our transportation system, thinking about where we buy our products. Like we've moved so far behind that. But if a family was environmentally inclined and they were still just stuck on recycling, well, that's kind of ridiculous, right? We need to have a belief in the next generation that they have the care for the legacy and the understanding of the context to be able to reinterpret that for what it needs to mean today. And more importantly, again, if they're going to come together, they need to come together around something. Unless they have some ability to affect what that thing is, it's going to be really hard for them to commit to one another. They can commit when they have some ability to affect that decision. They will commit when they have some ability to affect where they're going.
Right. I love that. And as you said, ensuring everyone has that voice in that process is so important, that they've bought in and are willing to participate.
Well, and I think just an important point around that too is that there's a difference between a voice and a vote. You know, a family might decide that certain people in their family have a voice and some people have a vote and the voice. And as long as people understand how that all works, as long as people feel heard, people can go along and actually be happy with a choice that they wouldn't have themselves made, as long as they feel good about the process.
Right. Yes. So feeling good about the process rather than the result is, yeah, great. Tim, as we near the end of our conversation today, there's a few questions that I ask each guest. Are you ready for the tough ones?
Sure.
All right. Now, what is one key strategy that you believe is most essential for building a successful family enterprise?
I think this is maybe another thread that has run along a lot of our discussion today that we haven't talked about yet, which is intergenerational teamwork. For those dreams to be passed on, for that expertise in that particular business to be passed on, for that trust to be built, you have to have teamwork between generations. And I love the word teamwork because it's a gradient. When that top draft pick comes up on the Flames, even if he's an amazing player, he's not the captain the first day he joins the team. And he might not even be on the first unit power play. But he will eventually earn that, because eventually the team will understand what that guy is capable of, and they will give him responsibility commensurate with his capability. But more importantly, they will always be aligned with where they're all going. They're all trying to win the game. And I think that's what family businesses need, whether it's within the business structure, outside the business structure. You need to have that intergenerational teamwork.
I love that.
The rookie coming in doesn't need to have a vote, but they need to have a voice, and they need to at some level have growing responsibility, because unless they learn alongside, then they'll just never learn. And when you are no longer there to pass this along, they'll just be kind of left to fend for themselves with the experience that they've never garnered.
Fantastic. That does go so well with our conversation, Tim. Now, next question would be, what is the most common challenge that you see family enterprises encountering when it comes to wealth transition and generational continuity?
I think it's difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I gave myself a birthday present over the family day long weekend, which was, my family were up in Whistler skiing, and that's the busiest weekend of the year up in Whistler. And so I gave myself a ski class, and it's called the Extremely Canadian Steeps program. So they take you on all of the like gnarliest, scary parts of the mountain. And it's also because you get to bypass lift lines. So anyways, they're taking us to these scary parts of the mountain, and these are consequential steeps. There's a couple times they said, we're coming in here and someone had died here this year.
Wow.
But don't worry, they were just really stupid. So as long as you listen to me, you're going to be okay. So they guide you in, they give you step-by-step guidelines and advice on how to do it well and do it properly. And they take something that's super consequential, super dangerous, and they make it approachable. And that's what difficult conversations are, in the sense that when you don't approach them well, when you don't know the step-by-steps and you don't have a safe space in which to have them, they're very consequential. They can scar permanently. They can even maim. And that's where having an advisor who is good at holding that space, who is there to keep everyone safe, that is there to give off ramps or to reframe, or to, I think what you meant was, that's really, really helpful. And it takes those consequences and it tames them.
Right.
But I think the problem is, without that external support, you've walked into this dangerous terrain and you're just hoping for the best. And I think that's why, maybe even wisely, sometimes families just don't have these conversations, which creates its own basket of problems.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's one of the really big things that families struggle with. And that's one of the ones where families really just can't be their own doctor.
Love it. And as you said, some of these conversations can feel like life or death, and such large consequence if it goes wrong. And
Mhm.
so, as you say, as advisors, to be able to hold that space and allow for that to happen without it being so consequential.
Mhm.
Tim, in your experience, what would you say are the top three qualities that successful family enterprise leaders possess?
I mean, there's so many, but you said three, so I had to limit it to these. I think humility. You need to be able to admit when you're wrong, to know what you know and what you don't know. I think almost by definition, all of these family business leaders, they're not going to be in the first generation. And so you can't think you're playing tennis. You're playing basketball, you're playing football, you're playing a team game at this point, and you have to understand where your strengths end and your limitations start, and where you need to be able to admit that and get support, say sorry, all of the things. I think listening, I think part of the ability to move forward into the future for families is the ability to communicate well. And I think it really fundamentally starts with listening, to be able to hear what other people are saying, to be able to tease out what they're really wanting to talk about. Because I think when people feel heard, they almost don't always care what you have to say, because they're already kind of aligned with you. And I think the last one is being a learner. We have a tremendous capacity for self-deception, myself included. And it's really supportive of us to be able to adopt the mindset of a beginner, to know that we haven't figured things out, that we haven't lived our life yet. And so we're just figuring it out, whether it's living your life, being a parent, being a partner. We haven't done this before. And so we need to have grace for ourselves. And we also need to, I think, adopt a learning mindset, that we can continue to grow, that we can continue to lean into these challenges and become more.
That's that's amazing, Tim. The adopt the mindset of a beginner is absolutely, there's so much to learn in life, and the curious one is definitely a great quality of a leader. That's fantastic. Now, before we conclude our discussion, I'd like to highlight where our listeners can engage in more conversations that you're having. Would you kindly provide us where our guests can find you?
So I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm there Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm posting somewhere between 3 and 5 times a week. So you can catch my content there if you're interested in geeking out on family enterprise stuff. You can reach me on my website, www.timyeung. That's Tim, Yeung.me, M-E. And I've got my email in there. You can book time with me if you want to reach out. And I also work and advise families with LGA, Landsberg, Gersick, and Associates. So I'm available on both of those websites. So if you want to reach out, that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. And I wanted to make sure that we covered everything today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything. We covered a wide variety of topics. I think I said a lot of stuff that I didn't plan and I hope was not terribly incorrect. And I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Corey.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Tim, for sharing your time and the experiences and expertise that you have. Your insights have been extremely valuable, and I'm grateful for the contribution to this episode, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy the conversation as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey.
As we wrap up this episode, we invite you to reflect on the expertise Tim has revealed, which is unity emerges not by minimizing tensions between generations, but by harnessing those tensions through patient dialogue that empowers successors to reimagine inherited legacies worth carrying forward. whether you are part of a family business or provide consulting to them. May these insights equip you to nurture understanding, enabling unity through dialogue and belief in rising generations. Throughout our discussion, Tim offered several insightful takeaways to put into action. Foster open family communication that affords next generation space to shape identity. Intentionally engage the entire intergenerational system in co-creating a flexible, shared vision and values. And demonstrate belief in successors' potential to sustain enduring legacies by granting latitude to adapt them for changing times. For those seeking additional guidance on the themes covered today regarding enterprising families and generational transitions, you can find Tim at Landsberg Gersick Advisors or on his website, available in the show notes. Thank you for joining me, Corey Gagnon, your host of Legacy Builders Podcast. It's my personal passion to explore with you these topics related to family wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to share this episode with family, friends, and colleagues who you care about. If you'd like to help support this show, you can do so by leaving a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything shared on today's episode, or have topics you'd like us to dive deeper into in future episodes, please let us know by emailing beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com. That's beaconfamilyoffice@ASSANTE.com. Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises is brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante. Are you worried about losing what you've created and seeking ways to transition your wealth across generations? Beacon Family Office at Asante supports our clients transition their wealth while maintaining relationships. If you'd like to access more content we've created, you can visit us at beaconfamilyoffice.com or for more details on our services and book an initial call. Thanks again for listening, and until next episode, stay intentional about building your legacy. This program was prepared by Corey Gagnon, who is a senior wealth advisor with Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. This is not an official program of Asante Financial Management, and the statements and opinions expressed during this podcast are not necessarily those of Asante Financial Management. This show is intended for general information only and may not apply to all listeners or investors. Please obtain professional financial advice or contact us at beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com or visit beaconfamilyoffice.com to discuss your particular circumstances prior to acting on the information presented.